I'd like to welcome to the broadcast today Kris Rystrom Emmert. She is the author of a book, Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. And I thought it would be great to have you on.
Thank you.
Local author. You speak and travel all over the country talking about how much your story has changed you and is changing the lives of others. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely. That's my message. I give hope, especially to those who've lost loved ones in service.
So let's start with your story.
Okay.
What's your story?
My story actually happened 25 years ago. And the reason why the book just came out was my oldest daughter, she was 3 at the time. Now she's 29, living in Houston. And she asked me to write the book about her dad. And so I've been speaking about it for many, many years, but finally I put it to print. But I was married to a naval officer. He was actually an NFO. He flew the E-2C Hawkeye, which is the aircraft that is a radar plane, slow, turboprop, not a fast jet, but it is based on aircraft carriers. He was an officer, and we were married for 7 years, and he was deployed during the Bosnian relief effort. It was called Operation Provide Promise, and that's why I titled the book, Providing Promise.
Where'd you guys meet?
We met in Norfolk, Virginia, and of course we were stationed in San Diego and actually had an Air Force tour in Nebraska where he was from, and we were really living the perfect life. I was a stay-at-home mom of our 2 little girls, and I just finished my master's and was getting ready to pursue my PhD, and we traveled, we scuba dived, we just really had a great marriage, really loved each other. That's kind of my story, is this beautiful love story. And I had naval officers come to my door one Friday morning. He was deployed on the Theodore Roosevelt. They had just left for Operation Provide Promise. And I had the naval officers come to my door one Friday morning. And they were there to tell me that his plane had crashed into the Ionian Sea, which is off the boot of Italy, the night before, killing him and the 4 other men that were on his aircraft. And he was only 38. And he was up for commander. The promotion was meeting that week, actually. And they never found the plane. And they also never found my husband. He was lost at sea. The whole crew was lost at sea. And to this day, 25 years later, I have no answers.
So you don't know how?
Nope.
Why?
No, nothing. My JAG investigation is almost 700 pages. And the first sentence says, the cause of this mishap is unknown. So for the rest of my life, and also for my daughter's lives, they will never know what happened to their dad, and he's at the bottom of the Ionian Sea with the rest of his crew.
Do they have any record of radio communications right before he crashed?
Yes. In fact, what happened that I know is there was, on an aircraft carrier, you have 4 arresting wires, and that's what catches the tail hook on your jets. And if any one of those arresting wires is loose, they call a foul flight deck. So they called a foul flight deck. My husband's plane was coming in for a landing. It was about 1 a.m, and they just finished their mission, but there's a foul flight deck. So the tower radioed the aircraft and said, foul flight deck, and they do what's called a wave off. And so they passed the aircraft carrier, and they went about a mile out with the intention of circling the aircraft to come in for a second landing, but instead they just flew straight into the water. They didn't have no signal for help. They basically said 603 Roger, that was the number of the aircraft. And they just flew straight into the water, no really reason why. Thankfully, there were some pieces of their wreckage that floated up to the top of the ocean, and the Navy did recover those pieces. So I have 2 pieces of my husband's plane. So that's all I received. But where they crashed, it's a mountainous range under the water. So they went so far deep into the water that the Navy couldn't recover the aircraft.
What did they say when they came to the door?
They didn't. They just were crying. There were no words. It was just completely silent. And John, my husband, he would tease me about if any time naval officers come to your door and they're dressed in dress blues, then they're coming to tell you that I'm gone. And he would tease me about it. And I would say, stop it. You fly the safest plane in the Navy. That's what he used to tell me. But any aircraft that flies on and off aircraft carriers is not the safest played in the Navy. It's actually the most dangerous job in the world. So I saw the stripes going by my dining room window. I was feeding my 7-month-old baby in her high chair. I was in the kitchen and I saw those naval stripes, and it was like just a split second of going, why are naval officers coming to my door when John's at sea? And by the time I got to the front door and opened it and I saw them standing there crying, they didn't even have to say a word. It was horrific.
So what'd you do?
Well, after I fell apart, I started picking up Barbie dolls. My little 3-year-old was at preschool. Such a random act. I was in shock, of course, but my mind went to people are going to be coming to the house, and our family room had Barbie dolls all over the floor. So I got down on my hands and knees and started picking up Barbie dolls. Isn't that such an unusual thing? But
I don't know that it is unusual. I would imagine that when the brain is in shock, it goes to automatic mode.
yeah, that's exactly what happened. And then, of course, my first question, and I call this in my book, I call them the men in stripes, because they were complete strangers to me. It was a chaplain and a KCO officer. And I asked them what happened, and they didn't have any answers. They actually were just saying, we searched all night long, because the crash happened at 1 a.m, but it was in March 26, 1993 is when this happened, and the water was freezing. So in reality, after they searched, they understood that the crew probably wouldn't survive just because of hypothermia, and they probably wouldn't have survived the crash, but they searched anyway all night long. And so they didn't know what happened, and it just kind of threw me, because I was going, aren't you the Navy? Aren't you military? Aren't you protecting our country? What do you mean you can't find a plane? It was just, it's a $60 million piece of aircraft, and it's large. It's not a small aircraft. But then, of course, I wanted to ask about the other crew members, because in Norfolk, when you're part of a squadron, you're a family. So I knew all the other wives of the squadron. So I knew that there were other women that were having men in stripes come to their door as well. And so, of course, I asked who the other members of the crew were, and I knew all of the women, and one of them was pregnant with their first child. She was due any day. And so my mind actually went to, what about Katie? Because I was concerned that, maybe she would be in such shock that she would miscarry the baby.
Let's take a break. The book is entitled Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. Kris Rystrom Emmert is author of the book Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. And we're just in the beginning phases of her story. She's wearing stripes today, by the way. The men in stripes came to her house to tell her, your husband is not only missing, but we can't find him or the plane. And she's kind of unpacking that story. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Memorial Day weekend has to hold
rough.
a really special place in your heart.
We don't do picnics.
Yeah. or white sales. Or,
No, I don't go shopping.
So I want to kind of look at, so you get the word, you start picking up the Barbie dolls, you start thinking about the other wives. This is a big loss in your world. It leaves a gaping hole. You have a 7-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Right.
Right. And you're right in prime time.
Right. We had just built our brand new custom, beautiful dream home and planning a trip to Disney World in the fall.
And it's all gone.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm handed wreckage. And that's really my message, is when you're handed wreckage, or I also compare it to being handed my folded flag. The front cover of my book has me holding my folded flag in front of the ocean, because that's where my husband is in the bottom of the ocean. Is when life hands you a folded flag, what are you going to do with it? Especially when you are at the prime of your life. And my message is really of hope, and to give hope to those people that are suffering, and their loss isn't going to look like mine. It's going to be different.
It takes something to get to hope, right?
It does. It's a journey.
It's definitely a journey.
Yes.
I've always been curious about just some really practical stuff. What happens to the money?
Yeah.
How do how do you survive? Does the military write you a check? Do you continue to get his pay for a period of time? Is there insurance?
Yeah.
How do you, that's the practical part of survival.
Right. And what's interesting, and I do talk about this briefly in the book, is at the time the military had increased life insurance for pilots because typical insurance companies will not insure a pilot, a Navy pilot, because of the dangerous job that they do. So they had just doubled the insurance policy maybe the week before the crash. I forget the timing of it, but I talk about that where John signs off on it. So I did get insurance. And then, of course, I do get VA benefits. I did. And my children received his VA benefits. In fact, thankfully, because of the VA, my girls were able to go to college along with the scholarship program that was established after the crash. And my 7-month-old graduated from Carson Newman.
What do you tell the 7-month-old? Well, I don't know if you tell the 7-month-old. What do you tell your 3-year-old happened to her dad?
Yeah, and that was the most difficult day of my life, actually. She was at preschool, and so I had her go home with a friend that night because I didn't want her coming to the house because all these people were there, all these strangers, all these military people were there, and I didn't want to freak her out because I was making phone calls to our family members, John's parents, my parents, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. So she came home the very next day, and it's such an interesting conversation. And my parents were there. They were from West Virginia, so they came in, and we sat her down in the playroom away from all the craziness that was happening in the kitchen downstairs. And I told her, I said, Jordan, I have something very sad to tell you. She goes, what is it, Mommy? I said, Daddy's plane broke, and it crashed into the water last night, and Daddy died. I mean, what do you say? You have to tell them the truth. And of course, I'm weeping, and she starts to cry, and she goes, is my daddy coming home? And I said, no, baby, he's not. I'm sorry, Daddy's never coming home again. And then she looks at me, and she says, is my daddy happy? Isn't that interesting that a 3-year-old would say that? And my husband was a believer, and I was able to tell her, yes, Jordan, your daddy's happy because he's in heaven with Jesus. And then she stopped crying and went outside and played with friends.
She's your 29-year-old.
Yeah, she's an attorney in Houston.
So when she told you she needed this book,
yes,
you guys must have had conversations leading up to you actually being able to document your journey.
I've been wanting to write it for many, many years.
Why did she say she needed it?
Well, she has a daughter, my granddaughter, and she wanted to pass down the legacy to her. And she felt for the 25th anniversary, it would be an appropriate time. I'd just been up to Arlington. He has a marker in Arlington, and most people don't know this, but if you don't get a body back, they have a memorial section at Arlington National Cemetery. It's beautiful. It's under trees because they don't have to dig graves. Well, I put a marker there, and then I put one in Nebraska, his hometown. So I had gone up there to see it, and a friend of mine was with me, and she said to me, Kris, you need to write a book, because she was asking me. I met President Bush Sr. and had a precious pen pal relationship with him. I met Jane Smith Walcott. Her husband was the Challenger pilot. Just so many interesting little stories that occurred after the mishap. And when she said, you need to write a book, I said, yeah, I know. Jordan wants me to write one too. And I said, but I don't know that I can. I talk about it. I'm a speaker, but I'm not necessarily a writer. And she introduced me to my co-author, Julie Voudray, who's in Johnson City, and she's a ghostwriter. So I said, if I have somebody that I can tell the story to, then that's going to be so much easier to get through those really hard parts. And then we ended up both co-authoring the book together, and she did all my military scenes. She interviewed pilots and many pilots and naval officers, admirals, captains. And so it was a team.
What are these scenes of?
Well, we go through the story of John joining the Navy and him going to flight school in Pensacola. And then we take the reader to him learning how to fly the E-2 Hawkeye, what that entails. Again, most people don't know what an E-2C is because they're used to F-14 Tomcats. They think, all the fast jets that, like Tom Cruise flew in Top Gun. They don't understand that the E-2 is the most important aircraft on an aircraft carrier because it's the eyes and the ears of the air. They tell the F-14s where to go and what to do. They're the mission commander. They're like the quarterback. So we go into that detail, and then we have a great chapter that Julie just did all this research. It was fantastic. And then, of course, I had all of John's service records and all these military documents. And she and her husband read through the JAG investigation 3 times to get it accurate, because the crash is actually to the second when we write it, when she writes it, actually. But there's a chapter in there about what it's like to live on an aircraft carrier.
I've been on one.
Which one?
Is there one called the Reagan?
Yes.
When it was first commissioned, it went through the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I was taken out to
How about that?
take a tour, which was
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Fantastic.
It's a fascinating world. 6,000 men and women on a carrier.
Why don't we take a break when we come back?
Okay.
So you got a life that is as broken as that plane.
Oh, yeah.
Which you told your daughter, and you had to build back a life.
Absolutely.
You had to find love again.
Right.
Which was hard when your husband's your hero.
Yeah, I still love him. I will always love my husband, and that's what I tell widows when I minister to them. I say, you're always going to love your first husband. He's still part of your heart, but there's room in your heart to love again, if that is part of your story.
All right, let's talk about that in the book and where it's taken you. My guest is Kris Rystrom Emmert. She's author of the book Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. I want to welcome to the broadcast Kris Rystrom Emmert. She's author of the book Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. Thank you for taking time out today to talk about your book.
Thank
Where
you for
can people
having
get
me.
it?
You can get it at Cedar Springs Christian Bookstore here in Knoxville. And I also have it at the Front Porch Restaurant in Powell.
Great restaurant.
Yes, upstairs. Bart, the owner, allowed me to have the books there. And then you can get it on my website, which is providingpromise.com, or on Amazon.
All right. And we'll talk about the work that you're doing. So you've got these 2 little girls. You're putting your life back together.
Right.
And we were talking about what brought you to writing the book. And it's the legacy piece, because your daughter now has a daughter. You have a granddaughter. And you've made this journey. But you also made the decision to use your life
Right.
to provide promise or hope to people. Where in this journey do you go from grieving to giving?
Probably, maybe it was around at the 2-year mark, when I was asked to share my story publicly for the first time. It was at our church, First Baptist Church, Norfolk, Virginia. And when I started putting it out there, the response was incredible. Their widows were coming from everywhere, really. And we actually, the 3 other widows that were from my husband's plane crash, we decided to start a military widow support group. And of course, we started that immediately. And we kept inviting more and more people, and we ended up growing. In fact, we even had a man in the group. And his wife was killed. She was a flight attendant, and she was killed in a commercial airplane crash in Pittsburgh. And I saw that article in the newspaper, and I reached out to him, and he joined, and we became really good friends. And what I found was people need each other. And a lot of people, they don't know how to ask for help. They just put their head in the sand, and they just expect life to go by, and they go through depression and horrible anxiety and just stress. But if you have other people to lift you up, you can get through the calamities of life, because you can lean on each other. So that's what I've been doing. I've been speaking and sharing my story for many years. But now that the book is out, I'm finding that people are contacting me from all over the country. I even have some readers across the world. I'm having it translated into Spanish right now I've got the audiobook. We're producing the audiobook, and I'm getting the Kindle out soon. And then I'll be writing a children's book to go with it too.
So what have people told you about you sharing their story? Your story.
My story. Well, they thank me. And the big question that I had was, it was 25 years ago.
Right.
It's too late. Nobody's going to be interested in this story, this book. And I would ask people, I'd ask their opinion. I said, I think I want to write about John's plane crash and finding hope again. And they said, it's a timeless message. It's a timeless message. People are going through loss and grief and wreckage and devastation everywhere, all across the country. And there needs to be something out there that they can pick up and say, okay, if she can get through it, I can get through it. And what's interesting is I went to a Gold Star Wives Retreat at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove. And I'm finding, first of all, that most Americans don't know what a Gold Star family member is. And I have to explain to them. So I'm actually using this book as almost a platform to create awareness so that the public understands that we recognize our veterans, we recognize those that we've lost in military service, but what about the families that were left behind? We don't, when we stand up, let's recognize our veterans, but they don't say, hey, you wives out there, or husbands,
or children.
My children will never know their dad, and they're a Gold Star child. But most people, what's that? And so I'm trying to educate the public with that as well. But I was at this Gold Star Wives Retreat at the Billy Graham Center. There's about 35 of us, and it was invitation. It was a beautiful place, and they had a grief counselor there. And I went basically to take my book and to offer hope. And the first woman that I met was 31 years old, and she had just lost her husband in Iraq in November. She had a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And she's standing before me. There's just the two of us. And I was able to look at her and say, you're going to make it. I'm 25 years into it. And she just broke down crying because it's still really raw and fresh for her. And it was just a reminder that this is happening all around the world. And even if it's just for the one, and that's one of my hashtags I use is for the one, then it's worth it.
So worth it. Want to talk about finding love again.
Yeah.
We'll do that in just a moment. The book is entitled Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope, written by Kris Rystrom Emmert. And tell me your co-author's name.
Julie Voudray.
Voudray.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. I feel like I want some Grey Poupon and tea.
Yes, she's actually a chef, which is funny.
So more in a moment. The book is Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. Kris Rystrom Emmert and Julie Voudray.
That's right.
Got to get your pinky up for that.
It's beautiful.
So you're walking in your purpose, which is to bring hope to people.
That's right.
How'd you find love again? And did you feel at all hesitant because you wanted to hold the flag for the memory of your husband?
It really, that's a good question. Well, I've always held the flag.
Right. You don't have to put the flag down.
No, that's part of who I am.
But it has to be a pretty special guy.
It is.
That'll hold the flag with you.
I call him my Boaz. He, Joe Emmert, came to Norfolk, Virginia, to our church as the new youth minister from the little town of Morristown, Tennessee. And I was a young Navy widow with 2 little girls. And, my husband and I had made a promise to each other to raise our kids in church and to understand the love of God. And even though this was a horrific tragedy, and I do go into this in the book about how do you find hope when you've prayed for safety for your husband every single night while he's gone, and then you have to tell your 3-year-old that, that prayer didn't work, but God loves you. So I go into that a lot in the book about how I navigated that tragedy and my faith. So it was 2 years after the crash. It was actually, it's interesting because when I shared my story for the first time publicly, Joe Emmert, Reverend Emmert, was doing the prayer in all 3 services. And he said he had been praying for his Ruth. And if anybody knows the book of Ruth, Ruth was a widow. Not that he was praying for a widow because he was young and out of Carson Newman and starting this new job, but he was looking for someone who had a heart like Ruth. And he called me that night, and he understood that this was a very difficult relationship because I had this folded flag and I had these children, and I was a widow with no answers. But he said he loved me from the minute he heard me share my story and saw my faith, saw how I navigated the waters of a hard road and how I came on the other side. So it really, I didn't go out looking for a second husband. God brought him to me, and that's going to be book 2 after the children's book is done, is my Boaz.
What's your message to those left behind by those we've lost? What is your message to widows that may be listening?
Right.
What is your message to anyone that had great loss in their life?
Yeah, and no answers.
And no answers.
And no answers. Because there's many people that have loss and they have the answer of, oh, he got sick or she got sick or there was a accident. But what I found in my journey was life is full of calamity, and we have death and disease and destruction and heartache and abuse, divorce. I mean, fill in the blank. But that is not of a loving God. That is a result of living in a fallen world. And I didn't get that. I didn't understand that. I had to learn that the hard way, because I thought if I checked all the boxes off properly, then I was going to be immune to life's heartaches. And so I was living this perfect life. I had this success. I'd gone to Wake Forest University on an academic scholarship. I was a varsity cheerleader there. I was doing everything that I thought was going to protect me from heartache. So then when the Men in Stripes come to my front door, I went, wait a minute, I did everything right. Why am I going through this? If anybody, I don't deserve this. And so it's that reality that we get hit with this rock of despair, unexpecting it, especially if we think we're living in this world where heartache can't hurt us. But what my message is God loves you. He's got a plan for your life, and its heartache can be healed if you go to him for comfort, and you can't do it on your own. And you also lean on other people. My hope is you hold onto the truth. The O in hope is open your heart to others. The P is place yourself in obedience. And E is embrace the past and face your future. It's a hard road, but if you know that there's hope and that you're going to make it and that there's a purpose somewhere in the mess, somebody is going to be helped because of what you've been through.
That's powerful. You got to get this book. It's called Providing Promise. She is speaking this weekend.
Yes.
You're speaking where?
At Deaf Church Knoxville. And they meet at North Knoxville Baptist Church on West Oldham Avenue. And I will be speaking to the Deaf Church, and I will have an interpreter there. Their pastor will interpret my message.
Location?
217 West Oldham Avenue, North Knoxville Baptist Church, and the Deaf Church meets in the gym.
And anybody can come.
Anybody can come.
Anybody can come.
Yes, and we serve a breakfast.
Oh.
And we do serve gravy.
And free Rolexes for everybody that.
Yeah.
Kris Rystrom Emmert, what a pleasure to have you on the broadcast.
Thank you.
The broadcast, the book is called Providing Promise. You can go to her website, which is?
Providingpromise.com.
Oh, that's easy.
Easy.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.